at the Valdai Discussion Club, something extraordinary was unfolding deep inside Russia's industrial heartland. Ukrainian drones, seemingly out of range and impossible to track, were mere minutes away from causing one of the most expensive explosions the world had ever seen. Their target? The Azad Chemical Plant, a facility vital to Putin's war efforts, is producing the explosive ingredients needed for Russian artillery shells. This should have been impossible. The drones, small and low-powered, carried only enough fuel for a few hundred meters, nowhere near the hundreds of miles to the target. They were expected to run out of fuel 400 miles before reaching their goal. But the Ukrainians had something up their sleeve that Russian engineers never anticipated. The FP-1 drones weren't flying solo. They were being powered by an invisible airborne network, a chain of mother drones sending power to their attackers, allowing them to cover vast distances. The operation was meticulously timed to coincide with Putin's speech, ensuring that Russian commanders were distracted during the strike. The goal wasn't just to strike a military target, it was to show the world that Russia's fortress-like defenses were vulnerable. To reach the heart of Russia's military industry, the drones had to bypass a system designed to detect ballistic missiles, not small, low-flying UAVs. The radar system was built for threats coming from the sky, not from drones skimming just 200 feet above the ground. The drones were designed with a critical flaw in the radar's blind spot in mind. The Russian radar, known for its built-in 3-second delay to filter out false alarms, relied on scanning for faster-moving threats from high altitudes. At 3:51 a.m., as the lead drone crossed the 40-mile perimeter of the chemical plant, the radar's refrigerator alarm system, a system so unreliable it was named for its tendency to trigger false alarms when someone opened a fridge, sprang to life. It mistook them for a flock of geese flying in the industrial haze. This was the critical design flaw the Ukrainians were counting on. The system wasn't designed for something as slow-moving and low-flying as a drone swarm. The radar couldn't pick up the threat because it wasn't expecting it. At that exact moment, the lead drone deployed a cloud of micro-flares, cheap but highly effective, creating a radar signature the size of a passenger jet. While the radar scrambled to make sense of the suddenly massive phantom target, the rest of the drones dove into the valleys of the Ural foothills. The drone swarm was now using the very curvature of the Earth to shield itself from detection. The radar system, confused and unable to identify the real threat, was now chasing ghosts. The drones had successfully punched through the first line of defense, but this victory was short-lived. A new layer of defense was already being triggered, Russia's electronic warfare (EW) system. At 3:53 a.m., the radar operator's screen went blank. A Russian TK-25E electronic warfare pod had just activated, flooding the air with an electromagnetic pulse, strong enough to fry electronics from miles away. The drone's GPS and communication signals were severed. For any normal drone, this would have been a death sentence. The mission would have been over. But the FP-1 drones had anticipated this. As the communication link was severed, the drone's onboard AI switched them to ghost mode. The drones, now flying without any external guidance, relied solely on preloaded satellite maps. This allowed them to navigate by comparing the terrain they saw in real time with the terrain stored in their memory. It was like trying to jam someone's GPS while they were using a paper map. The drones had no reliance on external signals. But this wasn't just a passive response. The swarm had a countermeasure built into its programming. One drone peeled off from the group and detonated prematurely, sending out an electromagnetic burst that overloaded the Russian EW system. In that critical window of chaos, the first mother drone, launched earlier from Western Russia, activated, sending a pulse of radio frequency energy to the lead FP-1, recharging its battery just in time for the next phase of the attack. Despite the drone's ability to keep moving, Russia's ground defenses were still active. At 3:55 a.m., tracers from machine guns lit up the sky, and Russian patrols on the ground responded in panic. A mobile surface-to-air missile, SAM launcher, was rushed into position, but this is where Ukraine's strategy would shine through. The entire operation had been timed around one critical factor: human reaction time. The commander of the SAM crew, likely distracted by Putin's speech just moments ago, had to scramble to issue orders. It took them a full 10 seconds to lock onto the drone swarm. This was the 10-second gap the Ukrainians had built their strategy around. As the SAM system locked onto its target, the drones executed their final deception. One drone climbed sharply, lighting up Russian radar as a decoy, while the real swarm dove low, hugging the terrain and dodging bullets. The AI-controlled drones made course corrections faster than the bullets flying past them. The drone's onboard systems were capable of making 50-millisecond adjustments, avoiding fire like pro athletes in the zone. Meanwhile, the second mother drone was activated, loitering 60 miles away, and disguised as a weather balloon to evade radar detection. It beamed a focused pulse of radio frequency energy into the swarm, topping off batteries for the final push. By now, the Russian command center was finally realizing the magnitude of the threat. At 3:57 a.m., they sounded alarms, but it was already too late. The drones were almost on them. The plant's chemical safety systems began to activate, flooding the pipe junctions with foam, an emergency measure meant to prevent a disaster. But the Ukrainians had already mapped every inch of the plant, including the timing of the valves and the location of every pipe. They knew the weaknesses. It took 20 seconds for the safety doors to seal completely. The lead FP-1 drone was now just 1,500 feet away. The clock was ticking. As the drone closed in on the target, it ignored the foam, ignored the gunfire, and focused on one thing: the weak weld seam on the ammonia pipeline. This was the Achilles heel of the entire facility, identified through a combination of satellite imagery and real-time thermal scanning. At 3:59 a.m., the drone struck the target. The impact was not just an explosion, it was a physics lesson at the speed of light. The drone's warhead deployed a shaped charge, triggering the Monroe effect. This effect focused the explosion inward, turning a solid copper cone inside out. The resulting jet of molten copper, traveling at 15,000 miles per hour, pierced the steel pipe like a needle through paper. The superheated copper ignited the pressurized ammonia inside, causing a secondary explosion that tore the pipeline apart from the inside. The entire facility erupted in flames. The Azad Chemical Plant, the heart of Russia's war machine, was gone. The explosion didn't just take out a factory, it destroyed a key part of Russia's military supply chain. The 2.3 million tons of nitrogen fertilizer produced here weren't for growing crops. They were for making bombs. While Putin was delivering his speech about Russia's invincibility, this explosion was delivering a live fact check. The destruction of the Azad Chemical Plant wasn't just a loss of infrastructure, it was a strategic crisis for Russia. With the plant destroyed, there were no more explosives for artillery shells. The cannons fell silent. Russian forces were now dealing with a significant shortage in supplies for their military operations. The video of the explosion went viral, spreading across social media platforms in real time. Locals filmed the blaze, and the footage was uploaded for the world to see. The myth of a secure Russian heartland was shattered. Putin's claims of invulnerability now seemed hollow, exposed for all to see. This drone strike created an impossible choice for Russia's generals. Do they pull their advanced panzer air defense systems from the front lines to guard critical factories deep inside Russia? Or do they leave the heartland exposed and risk further attacks? The cheap drones had neutralized a billion-dollar asset and caused a ripple effect that stretched back to the front lines. No explosives meant no artillery, and no artillery meant no capability to fight. Ukraine's brilliant strategy had forced Russia to use its own defenses to weaken its own military strength. In the end, a few $1,000s worth of drones and clever strategy had neutralized a billion-dollar asset. Ukraine didn't just hit a target, they created a crisis that forced Russia to make a tough choice. In modern warfare, it's not the size of your army that matters, it's the size of your ideas. If you were the commander of this drone swarm, what would your next target be to exploit Russia's weakness? Tell us your strategy in the comments below. If you found this analysis useful, share your thoughts and strategy